347. Our song of encouragement, 347.
Good morning. It's good to see you guys. I said this earlier in class, but I've been grateful that it feels like I was just here. It doesn't feel like it's been a month or two since I've been present with you guys, and how I enjoy every Sunday to come see your guys' face. We talked about this morning in class finishing up the letters of John, and at the very end of 3 John, John is giving his final greetings to his audience that he's writing, and he says that there was more he wished he could say, that he could say writing down, but he's not going to, because he hopes to come see them face to face, and that's when he wants to tell them what they are, because he sees the value in seeing people face to face. And I can't help but feel that exact same thing when I'm always here, when I get to see each of you, whether it's familiar or new faces, whether you're from Pecos or from Kermit or all the way from the Philippines. It's so good to see each of your guys' faces. And so super incredibly grateful for y'all, and so excited to get into the Word this morning. So I want you to imagine yourself in this situation. I want you to imagine yourself, you're in the heat of battle. You're a soldier in the ranks of the Almighty and defenders of the Word. You have been chosen specifically to fight and fend off in this incredibly difficult fight, but not only a fight, some normal fight. You are chosen to fight and fend off an incredibly fearful, powerful, and evil enemy. You find yourself in a bunker, awaiting orders to start the attack. This is a time for preparation. All of a sudden, your general, he walks into the bunker, ready to assign you and prepare you for what's about to happen. He walks in and he says, "Are you ready for the fight of your life?" Your weapon, you're awaiting your weapons to be given in hand as he continues to give you this prep talk, saying this is a fight unlike anything you've ever faced. An enemy that is tricky, that is manipulative, one who is smart, that you cannot underestimate. Be cautious. Be ready. Look to each other. And he looks to you, he's like, "Are you ready for your weapons to go out to fight?" You're like, "Yeah, I'm ready." Thinking he'll give you some handgun or some sort of weapon, maybe a sword, a shield. Giving you something to face off this incredibly powerful foe, right? And as you stand in line awaiting, the general comes up to each of you, handing you your items, your weapons. But what you don't expect is what he gives you. Instead of some sort of gun, sword, or any kind of physical weapon to hit someone with, he comes up to you. You're there awaiting your weapon. He asks you to take both your hands out like this, and he puts in them a salt shaker and a flashlight. You're confused. You kind of think it's a joke. You're like, a salt shaker? A flashlight? What am I supposed to do? What am I going to do with this? But then he hands it to you, and then he pushes you out the door and he says, "Go." How would you feel if your general sent you off with those two things? To fight off this supposedly massively dangerous and evil enemy, but yet he hands you a salt shaker and a flashlight. What are the significance of these two weapons, you're thinking? They're not even weapons. They feel more like tools. It feels like you're about to salt someone's steak, or about to, go look for some sort of missing key that you lost in your couch. What is the purpose? What is so valuable about salt and light? We hear a lot about that in the church. As if you're a Christian, if you grew up in the church, I'm sure you've heard plenty of lessons or devotionals or like class series about salt and light. But do we truly sometimes fully understand the importance of those things? Do I fully understand those things? Because they're not only just tools that we have in our hands, we're actually the tools themselves. We are the salt and we are the light. But what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, the purpose of today's lesson is to see and understand the importance of salt and light and how they are significant in the war we are fighting today. Because that war I talked about, that imaginary scenario, it's one we're facing. It's one we are currently in. And the tools we're given, well, they're not what we expected. But what's the importance from them? So, if you have your Bibles, please turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. The Sermon on the Mount. For context, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 are the Sermon on the Mount. If you don't know what that is, it is a sermon that Jesus gives that is pretty significant, not only in history, but of course in the Bible. It's one of the few sermons we really see Jesus giving. Another one is one called the Sermon on the Plains, which you see in Luke. Some scholars debate whether they're the same kind of sermon, but regardless, this is the Sermon on the Mount, and it consists of the 3 chapters. And right now, chapter 5, we're still somewhat in the beginning of Jesus' sermon. He has just finished giving the Beatitudes to his disciples and those who are listening, and he transitions from the Beatitudes, which are verses 1 through 11, into this passage right here. We're going to be reading Matthew chapter 13, Matthew chapter 13 through 16. But let's start with verse 13. So read with me. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. Remember, this is Jesus speaking right now. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. So what a fun way to start off a sermon. You know, he goes through the Beatitudes, like we said, and then he transitions into this analogy. He calls everyone listening, his disciples in the audience, says, you are the salt of the earth. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean that we're the salt of the earth? What is the purpose of salt? Well, in today's world, we use salt pretty much, I would think, probably every day. But we use it primarily in today's time, at least I do. I don't know what you guys do in your spare time, but whenever I'm eating, I use salt to enhance or help the flavor of the meal I'm eating. Whether it's pasta, steak, soup, it doesn't matter. Most foods pretty much go well with salt. Even when you're baking cookies, something that is considered such a sweet dessert, you still put salt, from what I understand. With your dry ingredients, you put a pinch of salt in it to do what? It helps enhance the flavor. Cookies, from what I understand, wouldn't taste the same if they had that pinch of salt in it. And so, salt is valuable. It helps us today to enhance flavors. But what about back then? Yes, they used salt for when it came to food and things like that, but salt had a much bigger purpose back then. Salt was a very valuable currency. Back then, salt was actually used as a way to trade goods. It was a way to pay someone. Even in the root word, the word salt, it's spelled S-A-L, sal. And that's, if you know Spanish, that's actually the Spanish word for salt. But that root word sal, S-A-L, sal, you actually find it in our word salary. And that's for good reason, because back then, salt was used as a currency because it was so valuable. What else did salt do back then? Well, salt was used to preserve food. It was used to preserve items and things like that so they continued to be good. And of course, one I think that still works today is that salt stings. Salt can burn. I don't know if you've ever had like a cut on your hands from like a paper cut, or you were working hard in the field or at your job, and you come home, maybe you're going to cook a meal, whether for your family or for yourself, your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, and you're starting to cook, and then I don't know if you've ever gotten salt on your hands while you've had like a burn or a cut. It stings, and I don't like it. You want to immediately like wipe your hands away, but sometimes that just makes it worse. But salt stings. What am I trying to say with that? But salt brings attention to issues. It catches your attention to things. So when Jesus is calling his disciples, and of course, therefore, calling us salt of the earth, he's not just saying we're just some simple house spice, some little house item. Salt has multiple purposes. And he says the value that salt has is the same kind of value I'm entrusting you and calling you to. He's calling us something valuable. He's calling us something that preserves people. We preserve things. We enhance things. We take things that are bland and not good, and because we are salt, we make it better. We can help bring attention to things, whether it's with other people or even within ourselves. But what does that look like practically? We're called to be salt, so we preserve, we have value, we enhance, we can bring attention to things. But what does that look like practically? Well, let's think about in our daily lives. Even outside of this church building, whether we're at work or we're at home, are we being the salt that we're called to be? Are we bringing attention to problems that need to be addressed? Whether it's here in the church, we talked a little bit about that this morning. what we do when we encounter someone that is causing issue within the church? Are we, as parents or leaders of the house or older brothers and older sisters, helping teach our younger siblings or our children not to do certain things, to follow the right example? Are we showing love to people? Are we being patient? Or are we judging them and treating them as outcasts? Even in the church, when we worship God, are we giving Him the love and the respect that we are called to? Is the example we're setting one that will set a good example for those who are watching us? Now, I'm not just talking about our little ones. I'm talking about the ones that are outside of this building, the ones that are at our work, the ones in the grocery store, the ones that you see at the Dairy Mart here. Are we drawing attention to not just ourselves, but to what Jesus has done for our lives? Because I don't know about you, anytime I feel like I've treated someone with love, whether it was someone who was being rude or someone that was needed help on the road, it's one of those things that draws attention to people. They kind of ask, well, why are you treating me this way? Well, it's because, well, I love you. You don't deserve to be in this situation. You're still a person. I'm going to treat you as such. Right there, that's the enhancement. You catch them, you grab their attention and say, you are worth loving. I want to show you that love. That is what being salt is. Even to your enemy. Doesn't matter who it is, we are called to be salt. We are called to preserve people. We're called to protect. We're called to show value. We're called to show attention, even if it stings. We're called to do these things because the earth is bland. But there's a danger of being salt. You got to hear me say that. And Jesus addresses that. He says, in the last part of verse 13, he says, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. So, there's a danger to being salt. Being salt in itself isn't dangerous, but there's something we need to be cautious of. And that is losing our saltiness. Which in our practical world, we never heard that. When you salt something, it's not like that salt goes away. It's only, the more salt you add, the more salty it gets, right? So this idea of becoming less salty is kind of weird. I've never been able to make my soup less salty. If there is a way to that, I have no idea how to do that. But we can lose our saltiness. So what does that mean? Well, Jesus addresses that salt has a purpose. Therefore, we have a purpose. But it can lose its purpose. This can happen to us. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're the governor of Pecos. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher, a parent, a high school student. It doesn't matter if you are a commander or a general in the army. It doesn't matter if you're a chef. It doesn't matter what kind of person you are. You can lose your purpose that's given to us. If this happens to us, we are made useless and have no purpose. So much so that Jesus says, if you lose your purpose, then there's no use for you. You might as well be trampled under people's foot. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be trampled under people's feet. I don't want to lose my purpose. So how is it what are things that can cause us to lose our saltiness? Well, as we are called to enhance and influence the world, I think the same can be said the other way around. If we're not careful, we can let the influence of the world get to us, where we become less salty, we become more bland, we start to look a lot more like the world, we start to conform to it instead of changing from it. And that can happen through loss of priorities, by distracting ourselves. We see this by giving into our desires of our heart, desires of the flesh, and not doing anything about it. We do it by letting ourselves put our hands on the wheel of our lives and not letting God in control, which might lead to less emotional control, less control of the things you want. Because then if you're at the wheel, then you're going to do what you want, right? The world becomes your influence instead of you influencing the world. And when that happens, we're made useless. So what is Jesus trying to say? He says, we must not lose our purpose. We must not lose our saltiness. And we have to, and we are called to preserve people, to enhance people, to love them, to bring attention to them. Not because of anything that Gabe can do, because that's what God has given me. It's God working through me and working through you guys to do that. So let's not lose our purpose. But then Jesus continues on with his analogy. He says, you are salt. Salt does this. The people, his audience would understand the value of salt. It says, you are this. Don't lose that purpose. But then he switches over to another analogy in verse 14, through verses 14 through 15. It says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So verse 14, he switches from saying, you are the salt of the earth, to saying, you are now the light of the world. I always think of that song. It says, light of the world. I can't remember the rest, but we are the light of the world. What is he trying to say here? Well, there's a big difference between salt and light. Even this is the same for us today. Light today and even back then has value. Because if there was no light in this church building, if all the windows were closed, what would it be filled with? Darkness. And if it was dark, could you guys see me? Could you see each other? No. Would you run into things? Probably. I know I would. I'm pretty clumsy. And so when there's light, it brings attention. You notice light. You notice light. I don't know if you've ever, this might not be safe, but sometimes when I'm driving late at night, like when I drive back to Lubbock from Pecos, sometimes after I get gas, I forget to turn my lights on. But when I do, sometimes I like to think, I'm like, I wonder what it looks like if I just like for a second turn off my headlights and then turn them back on. And it freaks me out because it's just like, oh, I can see everything. And then it's black. And that's not good because even in our roads, if there were no headlights, we couldn't see each other. So light brings attention. Light is something that is noticed. A city set on a hill. I don't know if you've been to any large city and maybe you've been out on a lookout, like on a hike on that city. But if I have, when I went to Mexico City, I went to go watch a soccer game and we were on like the back rows, high up rows of the stadium because they were cheap. And as we were leaving, as I was walking out, there was like a big gap here, and you could see the city of Mexico City. And Mexico City, if you didn't know, is over 30 million people, has over 30 million people. And as I was looking, it was like the stars of the sky were on the ground. I could see the entire city because it was lit up. It was like 8 p.m. at this point. It was something I couldn't help but notice. A city set on a hill. Cities have light. You can notice it. But our light or our lamp, because they didn't have flashlights back then, they didn't have cell phones that had flashlights built into it, but they had lamps. It said, but Jesus says our lamps aren't meant to be hidden. It says a city set on a hill can't be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. I don't know about you. We use candles today. We use candles, to light things up. Maybe we lose our power. But we also use it, to make the house smell good. But what is the point of lighting a candle and then being like, now I'm going to put like my container over it? First off, I don't think that's good for the container. But what would be the point? It's kind of like a redundant question. He's like, you don't light something and then hide it. Why would you do that? Because our lights and light is meant to shine. And he says, but on a stand, and he gives light to all the house. You put, I'm not sure what their lampstands looked like back then, but you turn a light on in your house, and maybe you're coming home from some late night at work and your house is dark. You turn on that one lamp. All of a sudden, walking through the house doesn't seem as scary because you can see everything. Even if it's brighter in some areas and it's less bright some other areas, you can still see like that far room all the way down in the corner. So lamps aren't, and light isn't meant to be hidden. So what's the purpose of light? Well, people need to see our light. Not only in a functional way. We use light a lot today. We couldn't see our roads. We couldn't function maybe in our houses at night, of course. But outside of that, from a spiritual standpoint, people need to see our lights. It's the same idea with salt. Lights, the purpose of light is to show what's been hidden. And how often in our lives do we want to hide things? There are things that we're ashamed of, things that scare us, maybe some trauma, that we just want to push down. We want to push down because when it comes up, it's scary. It's frightening, reliving or rethinking or processing the things that have hurt us in our lives. I don't blame you for wanting to push those things down. I've done that. But Jesus is saying the opposite. Those things that are hidden, they can't remain hidden. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. I'm sure if we had time, we could talk about that. But for me, when I hide things, when I push things down, it means I'm ashamed of something. And the more things I push down or try to hide, the more cramped everything gets until one day I explode. I explode. And exploding can look like so many things. It might look like a fit of anger. It might look like depression. It might look like just giving up. Because we're not meant to hide and hold these things in. So Jesus is saying there are people that are going to do that. You're probably going to do that. But I'm calling you to be the light. To show what's been hidden. And to show those people that those things that are hidden, those things aren't scary. Or they're not things that we're going to run away from. One of my mentors, one of my AIM assistants when I was in AIM, Tim Kennard, he wants to be a counselor. And he describes being a counselor simply being this, is a counselor is someone that takes the person, their client, hand by hand into like the vast hall of their brain where all these things are hidden. And that counselor simply has a flashlight, and is someone who isn't afraid to show the flashlight on different parts of the house, different parts of the brain. But notice it says, but the counselor has that person hand in hand. Because they might be scared, but the person with the light, they're not scared. They're like, I'm here with you. Let's walk through this. I think it's the same idea. I'm not saying we're counselors in that way, but in a lot of ways, we're called to comfort. We're called to show what's been hidden so that we can be healed, so that we can deal with the issues. We can deal with the sin. We can deal with the trauma. We can deal with the resentment, the feelings, all of it. Hiding our lights is just redundant and will just lead to our own explosion. So yeah, light reveals what's in the darkness. So our purpose as light is to reveal what is hidden and to bring more people to the light. It's not just something you show someone their light. Now it's like almost, I guess in modern day, once they've gotten through that, when they've given their lives to Christ, it's almost like you're handing them a flashlight. It's like, now it's your turn. Even the darkest of corners, even the people that feel so far out of reach, shine the light. Because God's light can shine and reach to even the darkest of places. There's not a place in the world, whether it's inside you, doesn't matter if it's in a city or some other country, there's not a place that God's light isn't willing to reach and won't shine on if we're taking the light there. So shine your light. That's what verse 16 says. Verse 16 says, in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they